Don't you just love the smell of ethics in the morning? I know I do. Welcome to the Rabbi the Shrink. This is Dr. Margarita Guri, your host, Dr. Red Shoe, and this is my co-host,
Yonason Goldson.
The Rabbi and I are very blessed today to have our video producer and post-production guru, Peter Kelly. Welcome, Peter Kelly.
Thanks for having me.
You know, nowadays in this world of video, and the Rabbi and I have had many discussions about some of our colleagues' choices and people in the world, it's getting complicated because it used to be video was something that that only professionals do. And now you have a bunch of people doing it. Anyone with a video camera can do it. Anyone who can kind of figure out how to edit. And I think sometimes that creates some interesting and not so interesting results. So tell us, Peter Kelly, you've been a producer for 10 years, an editor, video editor for 20. You've done documentaries, including Ink, Alter Egos Exposed. You've done all sorts of video, fish heads, and context. Tell us what you think we need to know about video editing and ethics.
Oh man, it's so many. It's such a big topic.
It is.
As a viewer, you need to be aware that everything you're seeing is a series of choices. So I know I've had people send me videos from sources that are not reputable, and I'll refuse to watch them. And they'll say, it doesn't hurt you to watch a video. And it can. You need to be aware of who's made the video and what their bias is. And everybody's got one. Like I know when I make a video, I've got my own bias, and I try to remove myself, but I'm a human being. So you need to be aware though, as a viewer, is who's made a video, what was their intent? And then if you're the one making the video, there's a series of, questions you kind of have to ask yourself, not least of which is what I'm putting out into the world real? Is it authentic? Because it's very easy to twist the facts and twist the truth. And you can actually show stuff that is 100% accurate, but present it in a way that leads to an untruth, a mistruth, as it were.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, Peter, because what you're essentially doing is you're telling a story with the facts. And you just reminded me as you were speaking that one of the really most remarkable books I've read, a children's book, The Giver.
Yes.
Just a brilliant book. And when it was made into a movie, the two, I don't know, the producers, directors, the collaborators who were behind it, one was politically conservative, one was politically liberal. And they decided to collaborate because it's a story that could easily be politicized.
Right.
And they wanted it not to be. And they got stars also, as Jeff Bridges, who's conservative, and Meryl Streep, who's liberal. And they made a tremendous conscious effort to keep their own personal politics out of it. What are some of the strategies that you use? You mentioned you try to keep a check on your natural bias. What do you do to try to be objective?
It's very situational, but so you kind of have to just kind of assess what's the project need. The project need has to supersede my personal need. And I'll give I won't get into the weeds of it, but I worked for a news magazine show for a couple of years, and we were pumping out content very quickly. So I had to edit something together even like Wednesday morning, and it would go to air Wednesday evening. And there was a couple of clips of let's say a controversial president of the United States. And I had the opportunity, it was within my control. I could leave a clip long, show the full 15 seconds and he's not going to come off looking good, or I can show 5 seconds and he'll look fine. And I have my bias about that person, but the needs of the project were I was relaying facts, and he was part of the story, and I'm like, I just need to relay the facts. And in this case, my job really as an editor is to make people look good. So I kind of just went on that. I'm like, okay, I'm not going to change anything, but I'll present it so this person who I disagree with looks good, because that's what the piece needed. Does that make sense? So it's it's one of those I'm constantly wrestling, because I also aware that I've now presented him in a good light to viewers who, am I reinforcing their belief or am I changing their belief on this person? It's very easy to put together a montage of somebody who's incredibly articulate, but make them sound like an idiot. It's very simple to do.
And it's interesting what you're saying there is you removed some of the context. And by removing the context, you change the perception.
Yeah.
But in the larger context of your objective, it may have been entirely appropriate to do that, which is a really, naughty kind of a question.
So it comes down to, like, if I'm the editor and there's a producer, like especially for a news show, I'll have a conversation with the producer. It's like, okay, what are we doing here? Who's the audience? What are we actually trying to tell? And then within that framework, that's where you make the decisions. If we're trying to highlight a tragedy, as so often happens in news, then you're going to focus on the tragedy itself and the people affected, not any one individual. That's not a time to make it look like this side did this or this side did that. And really, a lot of it comes down to the world. People treat everything like it's binary. It's black, it's white, it's left or right. Politically, I'm not even American, and I know America seems to be split into two political parties right now. You're either one or the other. There's no in between. So you have to be aware that that's not the way the world works, and don't present video that feeds into that binary choice.
Yeah, well, we're certainly with you on that. And we talk a lot here about grappling with the gray, because most of life does exist in those gray areas. And it's comforting to us to make everything black and white, because then we have less thinking to do. We have easier choices to make, but we end up doing ourselves individually and collectively a tremendous disservice. And you see it in the news, and you see it in movies, and you see it in all kinds of video and media. And so, the authenticity of trying to represent both sides.
Yeah,
I can see this. It's a perpetual challenge in our personal lives, but all the more so when you're creating images that you want to be truthful. You have to be juggling that.
So the documentary, it's a hard field to be in right now, because of it's so easy to make somebody look one way or be aware of it. My favorite documentary, there was a series, pardon my French, but the title of it was called Bullshit. And one of the things I liked about it as a viewer was they would show you the edit points in a conversation. Normally when I put together like a documentary, if I was talking about video, I could potentially splice up my conversation and then cover it with shots of whatever I'm talking about. So if I'm talking about Marvel movies, you'd see clips of Marvel movies. And the audio underneath is going to be bits and pieces of different sentences, from the same interview. And one of the things I liked about that TV show was they showed you the person talking, and you could see where they made the edits. So you could see where they had removed parts of their sentence to make the point. So it was very transparent. They also played it for comedic effect, which helped. But ethically, it was like you could see the bias of the filmmakers as you were watching, and they were unapologetic about it.
Well, I like that. Well, the rabbi and I have been talking about video, and let's start with the basic question with the everyday use of video in Zoom meetings or whatever. What are some of the ethical dilemmas you have noted with just the use of everyday video?
It's an authenticity issue, to be perfectly honest. People, you have to walk that balance between you want to present yourself a certain way, but you don't want to misrepresent. Like a case in point, I have a background set up, and it's a very calculated background. So when I'm in a business meeting, you can very clearly see there's a video camera, right? And that's a subconscious thing. I want people to think of video, think of me. What you don't see just off frame is my office is actually a bit of a mess at the moment. And I can explain why, but that's irrelevant. But for me, every time I have a Zoom meeting, I make sure that my mess is not on camera. and I look like I'm in a pristine environment. I'm okay with that, because if I were to have somebody in my space, I would do a proper clean. So I think my background represents what I'm actually like. But I'm also aware that I'm making a choice. And so when you're doing video like that, your choice of words becomes a big thing. I find a lot of people, less so now because Zoom and video conferencing became such a main thing, an everyday thing for people because of the pandemic. But video was scary to people, so they would always try to put on their best face and sound smart. And you could always tell when someone was trying to sound smart, because they would be using words that they would never use. You know, like I would never say, "Who absconded my Chesterfield?" But I would say, "Who stole my couch?" Right? But the "who stole my couch" seems a little rough and tumble with, "Who absconded my Chesterfield" seems a little prim and proper. And you'll see that with people. People will change how they talk and how they behave on camera. And I think you're doing a disservice to yourself if you do that, because, even in a business meeting, be authentic. Because if you have to put on airs, or if you have to create a character, that's a character you're going to have to maintain whenever you interact with that person. It's so much easier if you find a way to be yourself, find a way to be comfortable, and just, I'm Peter Kelly. This is what I'm like if you talk to me on Zoom. This is what I'm like if you talk to me in person. It's a lot less work for me. And it also means that business-wise, I attract people that like who I am. And if you saw me and you saw one of my videos that I post on LinkedIn where I'm talking like this, and you don't like me, I'm okay with that, because that means you're not going to try to interact with me, and we've just saved ourselves a whole lot of hassle. So there's something like, ethically, you shouldn't misrepresent yourself, but it's also self-serving, right? Like, it just saves me a lot of time. If I'm just myself, I only attract people who like who Peter Kelly is.
So one of the issues that started happening, and the Rabbi and I've talked about this, is the backgrounds. And so we've seen different people in video on a yacht, and it's not their yacht. I mean, they're in a closet and they have a yacht behind them. Those kinds of things, I think that it can be done with a sense of humor and a sense of joy, or it could be done in a real fake. I'm pretending to be in Paris when really I'm in, Topeka, Kansas, things like that. And so the Rabbi and I've talked about that being something we're not comfortable with, which is interesting. Rabbi, you had something to say.
What did I have to say?
That's okay. We can edit this part out.
You're so engaging, Doctor. It just, when you speak, I forget everything else. No, but we were, to take the point just a little bit further. I think about times I've seen documentaries of how movies were made, and they show you the whole set, and you hear the sound effects they're using, and it's cringeworthy. You think, my gosh, how could anybody ever watch this? And then when they show it to you the way it appears in the movie, it's the camera angle and whatever tricks they use with the audio, it creates a compelling, real experience that draws you into the story.
Yeah.
And so, we have this issue when it comes to professional speaking. If I tell a story of my life that has a message that I want people to find value in, I have to edit that story. I can't put in all the details because they're not all relevant.
Right.
I can't always keep to the pure chronological sequence, because sometimes that can take people into the weeds and create confusion. So I have to balance, how do I present this story truthfully and authentically in a way that serves my audience? And again, you hear stories of people who misrepresent and over embellish and play games with the truth. And there's this temptation that the truth isn't always good enough. We were talking off camera about these movies that are based on true events or inspired by true events. And then when you hear what actually happens, you feel a little bit cheated that the story they told me was true is really has lots of falsehood woven into it.
Yeah, the inspired by is the it's funny, growing up, my father, he's a contractor, but he likes to tell stories. He's like one of those guys, he'd never get in front of a camera, not for $1 million, but he could have people sitting around the table and he'll keep them engaged for an hour telling them stories. And he used to always tell me, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And when you're telling anecdotes, that's fine. When you're producing mass media, you have to be careful. And actually, that reminded me of another point. Sometimes people will do stuff and it has the unintended effect. Like, let me ask you this question. What noise does a frog make? That classic ribbit sound that we all know? Most frogs don't make that noise. The frog that makes that noise is in Southern California, where Hollywood is. So it wasn't a deliberate misleading of people, but at one point in time, a couple of sound recordists needed to have the sound of a frog. So they went out and found the closest frog to them and recorded it making the ribbit noise. And then it gets used in 1 million movies. And it doesn't matter what kind of frog it is, because as an editor, I'm not an expert in frogs, but I have a sound effect that's labeled frog, and I have a video that's a picture of a frog. So you put the two together, and I'm being completely honest, but now the whole world thinks frogs make this noise that only frogs in Southern California make.
But if you went out and found the actual noise of the actual frog you're using, you could end up confusing your audience because they're expecting the frog to sound a certain way.
I've taken out some things because they didn't. I'm like, this is what actually happened, but it looks like it's fake. And that is an actual issue I've had to grapple with professionally for TV. It's a crazy thing to think that the reality looks fake, so I have to fake something so it seems real.
Well, sometimes we have to put a fake unicorn on a real unicorn. A unicorn horn on the, and from the last unicorn, they talked about that, because people don't always see what's really in front of them. All right, so we have from Charlotte, have you covered fake videos where real people are getting facial movements by AI and sound is cut from many different sources other than the Californian frog?
Yeah, deep fake. We haven't touched on that. You want me to talk about that for a bit, or do you?
Yeah, it's a great time.
Okay, so
great question.
So there's technology now where you can, especially in the day and age of podcasting, if somebody has a podcast out that's like more than 100 episodes, there's usually enough audio clips of them talking that you could, if you have the right program, make them say anything, because you have all of the noises that they naturally make. You just mix up the order in which they make it, and all of a sudden, because words are just noises, right? So deep fake is the name that's been given to the technology where people can superimpose. A big thing is to do clips from movies. I've seen a scene of Back to the Future, which in actual fact has Michael J. Fox and Christopher Lloyd, but they've replaced it with Tom Holland and Robert Downey Jr. And it looks incredible, but it's like you've completely replaced the actors in the movie. And that's going to be a growing trend. And what really, not gonna say scary, because it's not scary, but what the impact of it is that technology is open to almost anyone. Case in point, there was a Justice League movie a couple years ago, and Superman was one of the characters played by Henry Cavill. And they had to do some reshoots for the movie. So they'd filmed the movie, they edited it, and they had to go back and they just had to film a couple more scenes. And Henry Cavill had gone off and made another movie. And he came back for a day or two, but he had this big mustache and he couldn't shave it off to be Superman. He's like, I can't shave off the mustache for 2 days because I got to go back to the movie where I have a mustache. So they digitally removed his mustache in the movie. and somebody at home. So this is a big blockbuster film. It's got the entire, there would be a CGI department working on this. Somebody at home did a better job. They were so appalled by how bad the effects were removing the mustache that he just sat at home with his own computer and spent a few days and he fixed it. And he made it look better than a Hollywood feature film. And it was like, it was completely innocent because it was for a fictional piece. But if he can do that for Justice League and Superman, what's to say he can't do that for the mayor or the governor? Or, you can put words in people's mouths. You can change what they look like. And it's going to have to become a cultural thing where A, we learn to recognize it, but B, also we teach people that the choice to do that shouldn't be one you consider. I believe, you shouldn't be putting words in other people's mouths. And we just kind of
Arnold Schwarzenegger movie quite some time ago where the news people didn't have enough good news, so they redid the footage to make him look like he'd slaughtered people. I forget how it is, but it showed the ridiculousness that people could go to for ratings or whatever, and how authentic it looks to remaster stuff. It's a little scary, isn't it?
Yeah. Jordan Peele is a filmmaker now. If you Google Jordan Peele Obama, he made a video, I'm gonna say 2 years ago, that Jordan Peele does a really good impersonation of Barack Obama. So he recorded a whole bunch of audio, and then they had the video of Obama, and they did it purely to draw attention to the fact that this stuff can be faked. So it was done ethically, and you see the footage, and you see Jordan Peele side by side with the footage of Obama, so you can see what's happening. But it's remarkable how well they were able to make it look like the president of the United States at the time could say anything.
And I find this profoundly scary because we're already living in an age where people are so skeptical and so cynical, and fake news. And so what do people do? People typically go to the news outlets that tell them what they've already decided they believe. And I wrote an article on this a few weeks ago about the G7 conference, or is it G8? I can't remember. There were 3 different headlines on the same story from 3 mainstream news outlets that all sounded like they'd been on different continents instead of reporting on the same event. And how are we? You mentioned what really is obvious to us in America is that we are profoundly polarized. I think that the perception of polarization is much worse than the reality, but that the perception is driving the reality and is polarizing us further. And they're just, there's a certain zealotry to these news organizations. We represent the truth. We have a responsibility to get people to think the way we've decided they need to think. And therefore the ends justify the means. And that it's like somebody said, once you learn to fake authenticity, then you've got it made.
Yeah. It goes down to,
go ahead.
People need to become media literate, and you need to do the research and understand the bias that it's a corporation. Each corporation is going to tell you something, and why are they telling you it?
Yes.
And whether you agree with it, especially if you agree with it, you should be looking into the source. As a non-American, I get a lot of American news. It comes across the border. But it's really interesting because I see a lot of Canadian news and a lot of British news as well. And I don't think a lot of people in the States get that very varied opinions. So I always encourage people, look into sources of news from outside of your country. If you see what they do, because they have a lot less skin in the game. The British reporting on something happening in the United States, they don't have anything to gain. So odds are you're getting a more objective point of view from them. Not always, but look into it. There's one of the big news organizations in the States. If you look into it, they've argued in court several times that they don't have an obligation to tell the truth. And that's the sort of thing that, okay, I learned that. I don't consume anything from that company at all anymore. There's no upside. Whether I agree with it, whether I disagree with it is irrelevant. If at their core, they don't believe they have an obligation to tell the truth, I'm not interested in watching that.
That's right. And I looked up the name. It was The Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I think that, see, as a kid coming from Cuba, the communist country, we saw on the news and heard on the radio all sorts of stories which I knew were not true. Now, I don't know if the reporters knew it wasn't true. I don't know if they were editing or hearing what they would wish. Even people with certain heroes that are actually murderers, do they really not know that person? Like I see this t-shirt all the time, an iconic t-shirt with a murderer. And I'm thinking, do they not know that this person was this horrific figure? And the issue is the fake stuff. How do we really know? So let's say I'm going to listen to Canadian news or news from England or news from Germany or whatever. How does anyone know it's real or not? I mean, and if we're doing research by researching different companies, so people all ask me all the time about what's happening in Cuba, and I'm going to say I haven't been properly briefed. I don't know what's really happening. I see what I'm seeing, I hear what I'm hearing, I read what I'm reading. I don't know, because I know as a kid what they were saying, I knew for a fact was not real.
Kudos for you for saying that. I'm finding it's amazing how many people won't say I don't know.
I don't know.
What's your opinion on this? And they'll just start talking. And it's okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And I
wish people would. I mean, that's really a sign of wisdom.
Yeah.
That's a sign of wisdom. There, the late night show hosts sometimes will go out and interview people. And one of my favorite ones is when they asked people a number of years ago, which do you support, the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare? Well, of course, they're the same thing. But most of the people didn't know that. Yeah. And nobody said, gee, I don't know the difference, or what's this or what's that. And, the doctor talks about Cuba. I'm very sensitive to news about Israel. I lived in Israel for 9 years. I lived there during the first Gulf War. And while it was bad, Scud missiles falling on Tel Aviv, my parents were absolutely horrified in the States by what sounded like, Hezbollah in Lebanon. There was no comparison. We were going about our lives.
Right.
But the news media made it sound, and we're talking about bias. A number of years ago, I remember reading, I think it was Andrew Sullivan reported on this, that the New York Times had issued a series of errors about reporting on Israel. There were 9 errors in a short period of time, 8 of which favored the other side, were anti-Israel. So if they're innocent errors, you should find it's more or less 50-50. If you continue to make your errors favoring one side or the other, then clearly you need to re-examine your own bias.
Yeah, those are the biases. So what do we need to do as human beings, let's say with our everyday use of video, whether to present ourselves, to connect with our audiences, to connect with clients in our business, or even to inform ourselves about the world? What do you suggest we do, Peter Kelly?
Big question. Again, media literacy is a big thing. Being aware, even how people choose to film something can affect it. Like I do a bit of training for some clients about how to have effective Zoom calls. And one of the things I'll talk about is camera angles, because where you place the camera sends a certain kind of message. So if you have the camera low, so it's pointing high, that's a position of dominance. It's in the most extreme example, if you're to watch a horror movie, they film the monster and the camera's always low pointing up because then it's more menacing. In a Marvel film, they'll do that with the villain. And they'll actually do the opposite for the hero. Like in Captain America movie, you'll watch it. There's a couple of shots in pretty much every sequence where they've taken the camera and it's not extreme. They'll put it like eye level and then raise it up a little bit and tilt it down. So Captain America at the beginning of the movie subconsciously is a little bit weaker than the villain who's filmed the other way. And then at the end of the movie, they flip it. So Captain America's filmed low, so he's more powerful, and he's now overcome the villain, and he wins. So being aware of just the placement of the camera can tell you a lot about the footage that you're watching. If they've put the camera low and it's just an interview, they're trying to make that person seem like an authority, like they're an expert, like they're in control. If they're filming so they're low and it's pointing down, they're trying to make that person look weaker. And it tends to be a subconscious thing, but it is a real thing. Trust me, there's entire feature films, like they will discuss at length in pre-production what angle to put the camera at. I'm actually doing like an art film next week for a client, and we're discussing that this week. You know, what's the placement, what's the mood we're trying to go for? Again, it's very subconscious, but it's very real.
Well,
this is actually
Charlotte
not a
say,
new phenomenon.
Oops, sorry.
This is not a new phenomenon. You go back a couple hundred years to when they used to paint kings on horseback. And if you look at many of those paintings, you'll see the horse's head is undersized because it makes the king look bigger. And they want to present that sense of majesty.
Well, like in Jaws, they had this huge fake shark. And so they used a very small cage with the man with very small stature to make the shark that they had created look bigger, right? So it's about scale. Charlotte said something: we're hardwired and socially conditioned to believe our eyes, and deep fake will dupe people. She's responding to the deep fake stuff, but I think it's relevant to what we're talking about now. So what is ethical? Let's say we want ourselves to look better. We want to look powerful with our super capes on or off. We want to connect with our audiences. Where are we within ethical recommendations to shine in the world of video?
The single biggest thing is don't misrepresent, or don't, if you're doing something and it feels inauthentic, you've probably crossed a line. If you feel like you're faking something, then you are. It's one thing for me to put my camera a little bit low because I want to look good, or, you know, selfies, it tends to be a high angle, that's more flattering. So that's one thing, but it's another to be aware of how much you're actually faking. Like, am I buying a 3-piece suit that I only wear when I'm on camera? Now, that's not how I dress day to day. That's one of those gray areas. Nobody's getting hurt, but that's not authentic. So it's a matter of being aware of that. And the other thing would be, if you're ever using footage of somebody else, you have to make sure you're not changing the intent of what they were talking about. It's important. You have an obligation. I will often condense what somebody has said to make it fit into a piece. You know, they may have talked about something for 15 minutes and I only have 30 seconds to put it in. I'll make sure what gets put in represents that person's point of view to the best of my ability. It's easy to make it seem like it's the opposite. Or I think we were talking about this before we started filming. I read about an interview 2020 had done with a wrestler called Mick Foley, and they showed him a clip and got him to respond to it. And then they showed him a second clip and got him to respond to that. And the second clip was incredibly violent. And then when the piece went to air, they showed the second clip, but showed his response to the first one. So wow. he wasn't responding to the violence, and it made him seem like, not a big deal. And it was completely unethical, right? And it was just one of those, like, they misrepresented what he had to say. So that's the sort of thing, if you're dealing with other people's footage, just, even if you disagree with it, you're obligated to make sure their intent hasn't changed.
You know, that's a point that we mentioned before we started recording, and the doctor and I have sometimes different views on this, is how much credit to give people for rationalization that starts with good intentions. Right, yeah. Versus people who are simply salacious. They just want to advance their agenda. They just want to make a quick buck. You know, there's a fellow named Michael Schellenberger, I think. He's one of the big advocates in about global warming. on climate change. And he says that the people who do the most damage to the climate change movement are climate change advocates who misrepresent and overstate their facts and thereby discredit the entire movement. So do you have any insights getting into inside the heads of people who do what you just described, consciously changing an interview to make somebody look bad?
Yeah, that's there's a common thing. I firmly believe that when somebody has their point of view or their side of an argument, but they don't have a strong case, that's when they do that. And my argument to that is, if I have to make the other side look bad to make my point of view look good, then that says a lot about my faith in my point of view. So if you see something that looks incredibly unbalanced, ask yourself why. What case has the person who's looking good actually put forth? And my personal thing is, it's not even ethical. It's just a personal point of pride. Anybody can be smarter than an idiot. So if I make you who disagree with me look like an idiot, so what? If I make your case look incredibly compelling and then put forth an even better argument from my side, I mean, that's the best of both worlds, because A, it's balanced, and then B, the viewer gets to see both sides, the strong points of both sides of point of view. And then my bias, I'm not so worried about it, because I tend to come to things with, this is what I think. But if I've presented the other side in the best possible light and I still think my side comes out ahead, that says a lot about my faith in my point of view.
Right. And it says a lot about your point of view. And the rabbi and I are talking about that quite a bit, that one of the things we're hoping this podcast promotes is people being able to listen and express not only their own point of view and the reasons for it, but their understanding, their correct understanding of other people's point of view and where they get data for that. Yeah. So I think if you can state both ends of something, then maybe you have a chance of moving people's hearts and minds to your point of view, if it's thoughtfully and ethically constructed argument.
And what's the worst thing that can happen? Maybe I'll discover there actually is some legitimacy to the other side.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's almost always some legitimacy to the other side. I mean, the world is full of options.
I'm a big believer, if you're talking to a functioning adult and they disagree with you, there has to be a rationale.
Define functioning adult.
Yes, that's why I'm laughing.
But truly, it's like, it's really easy online to go on and have a conversation with somebody who you disagree with and like they're an idiot. But the reality is, if they've got a job, they've made it 30, 40, 50 years on the planet Earth and are a part of society, their disagreement came from somewhere. Like, their point of view didn't come out of a lifetime of being wrong. So where did that point of view come from? Why is my experience lead me a certain way when someone else's experience leads them the complete opposite? There's
absolutely.
It's
and
just
in America
that.
Right now, many of the arguments that are in the forefront of everyone's mind is there are more and more new requirements for universities, for government, different businesses to require not only the wearing of masks again, but to be vaccinated for returning college students, for people who work at this facility or that. And what I'm shocked by and saddened by is the emotionality of the arguments rather than the facts.
Yep.
Beyond are we justified in saying someone must be vaccinated? That's one issue. There are ethical arguments to be had. There's opinions to be had. Let's explore those. And then there's also who could be an exception to that? For whom is a vaccine an unwise and unhealthy choice?
Right.
I don't see people making those discussions. Rather, it's all good or all bad, or forget if it's dangerous or required or not, you can't make me. Well, I remember saying that when I was 5 years old, you can't make me. Well, you're not the boss of me. Well, no. We are the boss of our own selves now. So if I don't want to work in a place that's requiring a vaccine, I think before I make any dramatic emotional decisions, wouldn't it behoove us to look at the facts?
Yeah,
Everything based on data and data and science, I'm a big believer in. And sometimes you find out things that you didn't want to be true.
Yeah.
Yeah, but even within the scientific community, as you have certain conventions that if you challenge those, you'll be condemned by your colleagues. So it's not safe to take certain scientific positions, even if you do have facts on your side. It goes back to what you're saying about that sense of insecurity. It's one of my favorite quotes I used in my TED Talk from Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, who was one of the great rabbinic leaders of the last generation. He said, all fanaticism and extremism comes from a lack of security. He said that a secure person cannot be an extremist because I'm not threatened. I've looked at both sides. I've studied the issues. I've made rational decisions, and I'm confident in the position that I hold. And I love to quote my college professor who said, I don't understand people who complain about being disillusioned. Why would I not want to be relieved of my illusions?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. When I was in university, a song was very popular amongst my, crowd, lack of a better, and it was called the Sun Song. And it's a very funny song, but it's how the sun works. And the band, that was 20 years ago, has since come out and said, all of the scientific principles that they were singing about in this happy-go-lucky song, not all of them are correct. We've since learned that a lot of the things that we thought about the sun 20 years ago aren't true. And somebody in my group told me that, and I was like, oh, that's so sad, because I had this emotional attachment to this song. And I remember him saying, Peter, this is good. This is how science works. We learn something new, and then we adjust. I was like, you're right. You're absolutely right. So
if we adjust. The second most popular TED Talk ever is about this fake it till you make it principle. And apparently on a psychological level, there's much truth in that. But in the talk, the speaker says that there are physiological effects to that, which apparently have been completely debunked.
Oh, really?
And yet this remains an enormously popular talk because people like they like the message and it's reassuring, but it does challenge truthfulness.
Yeah, I would totally tap into the insecurity of fake it till you make it's really easy. I know for me, there was a very conscious decision one day when I was an assistant editor that I would wear a tie, and the perception around me changed almost immediately, where I was seen as being older than I was, more experienced than I was, and frankly, the amount of money I could charge per hour went up. So fake it till you make it. I can definitely see the appeal.
Well, and some of that is playing into the unconscious biases that people look a certain way and ask for a certain amount of money are worth it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, let's talk about something that the rabbi and I bump into all the time is we've all been criticized for noticing either a scientific principle or that a person wasn't quite right. Something's off with that person, or an idea. And we've all spoken up in contrast to the popular opinion, all of us, that I don't think that person's right. I think maybe they're misusing power. I think they've got something going on that is dangerous, or this scientific principle needs to be challenged, whatever it is that we're going against status quo. And the problem is, how do we move forward with facts calmly, knowing both sides, without having to always be ostracized or canceled, right?
And, yeah.
And that goes in video if you're telling a video story. So how do you walk that line when someone is trying to talk about a changing physiological fact or scientific principle or understanding about a particular person or organization. What is your word of wisdom to proceed thoughtfully and effectively?
The single biggest thing is to listen.
Yes.
If somebody's presenting something that doesn't conform to what you've been taught or what you know, just listen for a while. And it's amazing how I've suggested that and people get hostile. One person who, a friend of mine actually, he was like, I will not be silenced. And I was like, nobody's asking you to be silenced. I'm asking you to listen. That's all it is. So I find that you're never going to regret being quiet and listening for a bit, because you might learn something. And this is really easy for me to say. First to admit, it's hard for me to put in practice. I had an argument with my wife last week because she's like, you're not actually listening to me. You're just waiting for your turn to talk again. And she was right. But it's the listening and then understanding, again, it goes back to your experience. I know like gender is a big thing right now. And a lot of people see gender as binary. And I've seen the argument put forth, they're like, well, there was only girls and boys when I was in high school. And my point there would be, but do you think your high school biology class was the end of biology? Like, do you think you learned everything about, because I gotta tell you, I haven't done a single biology class in like 23 years. So my knowledge of biology is not great. So if somebody's going to tell me that there's more than two genders, like if you told me that 10 years ago, my mind would have been blown. I'm like, what are you talking about? But there is data and science to support that. And I've done a little bit of reading into it. It doesn't really affect my life, so it's not, major topic for me, but I've done a little bit of reading into it. And it's like, this is far more complicated than I could have imagined. So I'm going to let people who are invested and experts in the field talk about it.
Well, that's a really astute comment that we could all benefit from.
Yes.
We have a word of the day, which is coming up, but the first episode that we recorded, the word of the day was ultra-crepidarian, which means to express opinions outside one's area of expertise. and this is becoming an epidemic or a pandemic. Everybody's sees herself as an authority because I heard somebody say it. I saw it on such and such news network. Even the people I heard it from, what are their qualifications? Yeah. It's easy for some of us, it's easy for the system to create experts.
Yeah.
And I mean, that goes also into documentary, the people you're quoting, the people you're citing. Are you representing the different sides honestly and effectively?
Doing a little bit of research, I've heard multiple stories of a TV personality it was on a non-news show for a network telling an anecdote. That anecdote being reported upon in a newspaper, and then the news wing of the show that the person that told the story originally reporting on the newspaper. And it looks like you've got three sources there. And it all came from one person and it was completely inaccurate. But the expertise, it's very easy. I mean, in post-production, all I need to do is put my name, Peter Kelly. I'm going to put video producer, but I could put biologist. How would you know, right? You have that title there, and then all of a sudden I seem like I'm an authority. There's a reason why dentist commercials have the dentist in a lab coat. People in lab coats seem like they're experts.
Right.
Like, she's just an actress telling me to brush my teeth, but she looks like a dentist to me.
Or one of my favorites in the old Trident gum commercials, 4 out of 5 dentists recommend sugarless gum. Well, that's not telling you to buy Trident gum. And where do you even find one dentist out of 5 who said that you're not better off chewing sugarless gum?
Well, and the question is whether you should be chewing gum at all. But so what was the question of all of these horrible gums? Which one do you hate the least or the most? I mean, it's interesting how that goes, and how we present ourselves. And in my, I'm a psychologist. If we misrepresent our credentials, let's say you call me goddess of the world. Well, that's not my credential. So I'll have to say, I'm sorry, I'm not the goddess of the world. I am this. If I don't correct it, I could lose not only my reputation, but be censured by my licensing board.
Right.
If I let people call me a licensed clinical psychologist, where there's no such thing as a licensed clinical psychologist, just licensed psychologist. So we have to be careful with, not everybody. Now, I don't know if you're allowed to say you're a biologist. If obviously not. I mean, ethically not. But would you lose your license? Well, so sometimes there's teeth to something that if you do what you're not supposed to be doing ethically, you can get in trouble, and sometimes not. Either way, you lose your reputation.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of regulation. Having somebody, a third party, kind of verifying stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just a matter of, it really culturally though. I think we need to change how society a bit, so that way people don't make that choice. Like it should be. I have very strong views on billionaires, to be perfectly honest. I think that's people hoarding wealth. And my view is, I don't think we should make being a billionaire illegal, but I think we should, as a culture, make it so shameful that nobody would ever aspire to be a billionaire. So there's things like that where culturally, I think we need to have these conversations and agree on where we want to go and why.
And that's one of the reasons that we have this program, because as a pluralistic society, we have a lot of different opinions. And it takes a tremendous amount of effort to find common ground, to articulate common values, and to work together to strengthen those values, because it's so much easier to just sling mud and attack and withdraw into our little ideological enclaves and declare that everybody else is either misguided, deluded, or wicked.
Yeah. And then we only invite those kinds of people that agree with us into our world. I know I've gotten into trouble with at least one friend with our discussions about getting vaccinated. And I've been pleased that my friends at least don't become nasty. In truth, all my true friends have gotten vaccinated along with me, but the discussion with some others who don't believe in it, they actually think that they're being lied to and that the facts aren't real, and they have real reasons why they're not doing it. It's fascinating though. I love arguing with people who are reasonable. And
you come out, you learn a lot.
You can, and I'm trying to learn, and I'm trying to listen. It's fascinating. So speaking of listening and fascinating, Rabbi, I think it's time for the word of the day, sir.
Well, the word of the day is chosen especially for this episode and for our guest, Peter. The word is verisimilitude. Verisimilitude is the appearance or semblance of truth, likelihood, or probability. And it's very much what we're talking about. When I want to present a story, whether it's a fictional story with a true theme, or a documentary story that is trying to show the whole picture, just telling the truth does not always appear to be truthful. And the appearance of truthfulness can sometimes be used to deceive and to disguise a lack of truth. So once again, we're in this gray area where we have to balance our commitment to the truth with the presentation of the truth that ultimately serves the truth. And so much of it comes down to intention. Peter, you said earlier, we as a society, we need to come to an honest collective commitment, but not everyone in society wants that. Right. And that's part of the challenge, especially when so much of it is commercialized. You make more money when you drive people to extreme points of view. The algorithms are set up that way. And so we're not just competing against our own personal biases, we're competing against a culture that in many ways is set up to be untruthful. And we have to choose to commit ourselves to not give in to that.
Absolutely. One of the most fortunate things I've had in my life is I've had a couple of key people who they will boost me up when I'm low and when I need encouragement, but they're not afraid to take me aside when I'm wrong and let me know when I'm wrong.
That's wonderful.
If you get a couple people like that in your life, hold on to them.
Yeah.
Make that's wonderful.
You have conversations, and you know, we're living longer, but the quality of life is not always keeping pace with our age. And you know, I watched my father decline into dementia and Alzheimer's. One of the best ways to delay the deterioration of our faculties is to talk to people we disagree with.
Yeah, I can totally
because
see
we have to defend our positions better. We have to understand where they're coming from. And if we do that, we're going to come out more well-rounded people, more balanced people, and we're going to contribute to a more balanced society.
You'll literally be healthier if you listen to people you disagree with.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Wow.
So, Peter Kelly, what is a final either word of wisdom or call to action you have regarding video editing and ethics?
I don't know. It's so big. Look, just be honest and have faith in your point of view whenever you portray an opposing point of view. You know, that'd be my.
Yeah. And remember what Mark Twain said, that if you always tell the truth, you can have a lousy memory. But if you lie, you're going to have to remember every lie you tell.
It's so much easier to be honest.
It is
That's
so
right.
hard to remember a lie. I mean, even one you've rehearsed, you know, I learned that one the hard way when I was a kid.
So, Doctor, do you have a last word for us?
Well, I think I do. I am grateful. I know that Rabbi and I are both grateful that you've joined us, Peter Kelly. For us, this speaks to the heart of what we're inspiring folks to do, to have faith in themselves, to love themselves, to have enough courage to really look at what is and challenge their perception of that, because what is sometimes confusing, and ask questions and listen, research things. Don't just assume that what you learned in biology class half a lifetime ago still serves you well. So my point of view at this point is, if you're not sure how to move forward in the world of video, contact Peter Kelly, contact the Rabbi and I, contact other people that you can have a good discussion with, people who don't have to be right all the time, but who know how to think about being right and being wrong and missing the facts or not. And I think video storytelling, Peter Kelly, is what you do better than anyone that I know. I love the stuff you put together for Brita Miller and some of the stuff you put together for me. I think that telling the truth and being at the top of your game can go hand in hand. And I think Peter Kelly's a really good example of that. And may you always continue to be successful, all of you, like Peter Kelly, knowing that you tell the truth, you're more likely to succeed because you're telling a story that resonates. So all I have to say to everyone is be well. And we will see you next Tuesday at 12:30 Eastern. Thanks again, Peter Kelly. And Rabbi, again, thank you always for joining us.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Peter, for being with us.